Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out and coming on to the second episode of Conversationalist, the podcast. Today, we have with us Dean Furness, a very good friend of mine. He is a BI consultant with Wells Fargo. And when not crunching the data, by the way, he is something super amazing. So let's hear more from him. Dean, welcome to the show.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me. And yeah, it's great to be here. And it'll be fun to see where we take the conversation for sure. But yeah, my name is Dean. I'm from, middle America in the United States. I'm in a state called Iowa, which means that right now we have a lot of corn around us and a lot of soybeans. But yeah, my day job, I'm a business intelligence professional. So I focus on developing strategy-driven dashboards for our organization. So all of the KPIs and metrics and such that you try to drive a company through, the data components underneath that and having an interactive interface. For those that are in the industry, a lot of that ends up being with a tool called Power BI and a lot of those things. So there's a lot of business side effort that goes into the development of that. It's not just all technology, all data. You have to make the data screen and speak to, and maybe as a segue to converse about what's really going on in the company, right? But yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Same here, Dean. I'm pretty excited to have you on the show, as I said again. And I remember in my last organization, we used to hire, and me and my team used to hire a lot of BI folks in India, which is predominantly towards business intelligence and the business object side. And I used to hire a lot of people from predictive analysis kind of a background. So I can completely relate into what you do. Right. Of course, as at a very high level scenario, honestly.
No, that's fine. Right. And the predictive analytics side of it's really interesting because, whether you call it AI or machine learning or data science, it's doing something with the data. Right. And we actually just wrapped up some really interesting correlation analysis. And, it's one thing to have a metric that is on target or off target that you're chasing. It's something else to see what happens when you move that metric and what happens to the it gives you a sense of controls, maybe the wrong word, but you can certainly start to anticipate as you make changes what might be impacted. It's maybe more leading rather than lagging indicating, but business objects, huh? I don't know about using business objects. It's a long time ago.
I agree. In fact, what I'm also talking about is pretty long time ago. I'm talking about 2014 and 15, by the way. So yeah.
Feels like a long time, and it hasn't been. I mean, it's kind of crazy.
Absolutely. Okay, so pretty interesting. So, Dean, let's hear more from you. First of all, I have loved your talk. I have loved the talk you gave on the TED platform. And I believe you have, and I think you have actually, raised quite a few interesting points on comparisons and personal averages for that matter. That has become my favorite word, honestly. You want to talk a bit more about it? How the concept and the perspective of personal averages generally hit us all on the daily life.
Sure. There's so many different ways that we can take the conversation around that. And I think, let's just go back to what we just talked about, right? My day in and out is about measurement. That's right. It's a certain metric. It's a certain number, a certain line of business. And we're trying to measure the performance of that. But even going back, I don't have any advanced education beyond an undergrad. I have a Bachelor of Arts in Mathematics. So it even goes to that point where numbers have always been easier for me as opposed to maybe writing or other components. You've had to learn those things, right? Speaking in front of people was horrible for me, right? Very scary. As I'm a lot older now with my gray hair, you start to get better at that. But one of the things also growing up, and I think a lot of people, at least in the United States and maybe India and others, can relate to something like a baseball card. And it's a card of a athletes, and on the back of the card, it's all their statistics, right? And there's averages and there's hits and whatever else, right? No matter what the sport,
Yeah.
I don't like that. What's really interesting, and this is something just kind of came to mind in the past few days, like what's really interesting is on that card, you don't see anybody else's statistics. You only see theirs. And you only see their
exactly
or their next year, and you're left with just that card, being able to look at how that person is compared to themselves, not to others, right? So if you have Babe Ruth, who's batting 300, all you see on that card is his numbers. You don't see that in comparison to somebody else. So the personal average thing for me really comes down to, based on, and we'll get to this later on, right? But based on some scenarios that happened in my life, I was put into a situation with an accident that's left me as a paraplegic, and your people cannot see, but I'm in a wheelchair rolling around here, and I can't move my legs from the middle of my chest down. And my TED Talk speaks to that as to how that happened. But that occurrence left me as being a very singular being. There was nobody else around in my situation. I had no ability to look at somebody else and say, wow, how are you doing that? How are you getting along? What is the strategy for that? How do I get better at doing what you're doing? Because everybody else is walking and I wasn't. Everybody else is playing sports and everybody else is not in a hospital. And so there just happened to be something that kind of clicked, in that I had nobody else to rely on but myself. And I can't really point to how it came about, but when you are by yourself, the pure mathematics of the average of a single value is that value, right? It is what it is. The average of 3 is right. And so when you're on your own and you're by yourself, average becomes less of something that describes you and more of something that you possess. So if we're in a group of people, you might say, well, you are just average. And that adjective, that description, quite often isn't thought of very kindly. For calling me average, it's not a compliment typically, right? But that's in relation to the people around me. But if I'm by myself, average is something that describes me and only me. And it's something that, okay, if I want to do something about that, then let's do something about that. Let's try to get better. And then as a fact, the back of my little card, I can show that my numbers are getting better just for me. And so maybe to kind of break that down a little bit more. As I exist right now, I'm in this room. There's nobody else in this room. It's just you and I over the web. There's no way for me to compare with anybody else, anybody's, right? And so I don't have anything in front of me that says, well, they're better than me, or I'm not able to do something. I'm only doing what I do. And as such, I use that as a foundation. And if I want to improve on that, well, it's up to me. And it's not based on waiting for somebody else or relying on somebody else. It's really my challenge to get better at those things. And of course, we can go a lot of different directions with that part of the conversation.
No, I completely agree to your point. And I have a bigger input or a question, and that's not just to you and to myself as well. Why do we in fact get into a trap of comparing ourselves? And this is not in our adulthood, by the way. This has been the success, the good, everything is all relative, right? I am good comparatively to the environment I am in, and I'm bad comparatively to the environment I am in. So everything is relative around me. And I think that, is it parental? Is it because of cultural aspect? I don't know what it is, but what's your take into it?
Yeah, it's social, it's parental, it's environmental, it's things, right? The interesting part about a lot of that, there may not be an answer, but it certainly is more prevalent and has been accelerated in today's world, given the internet, right? And given our ability to get news at an instant. And so let's kind of back that up a second as well. The idea of good or bad is quite often based on your perception of what's around you, right? And quite often, if you can separate the good and the bad from a comparative standpoint, and simply be aware of what is around you, I think you can really draw. So as an example, I am certainly aware of somebody that is performing beyond what I'm performing. And my perception that they are faster, stronger, better at their job, and so on. But I'm very careful to say that doesn't make me less. That just
exactly
is what it is, right? And so, we can get into some of the other things that are very much easier that way. So as an example, though, if you're going to go run a marathon, if you're going to go play athletics, if you're going to go try to be better at your job is to make your resume stronger. Your job isn't to make your resume. It's not to make your resume into their resume. It's to make your resume stronger. And, the real challenge is how do you set yourself apart? And in the IT industry, maybe you've been to a large conference where there's 500 people, 1,000 people in the room. How many of those resumes are almost exactly the same in that room? We're all at the conference because we care about BI or data. So for the most part, resumes are kind of the same anyway, right? So how do you set yourself apart? And if you focus on what other people are good at and what they're good at, you're really not focused on what you could be good at and what you bring to the table in that manner. I really think that we'll take BI as an example, and this may be out there, whatever. If you don't know data and you don't know how to write SQL, you're probably not going to get hired. I mean, just to be honest, right?
As simple as that.
You don't get in the game if you can't do that. So let's assume that if you're applying for that job, you have that skill. I don't even need to ask you. Otherwise, you wouldn't even have applied for the job. So why am I going to hire you over everybody else that's in there? And if you focus so much time on trying to be like the person on the web or your coworker or whatever, you're really losing sight of the fact that what you can do. And in my case, I've really settled in on how I can design the experience for the user within BI is where I feel I can excel. And that becomes my sales pitch, right? So if you're BI and you're interviewing me or discussing a project with me within the organization, I'll really quickly focus in on how the business experience is enabled through the data and try to make that be what I can bring to the table that's different. I don't have it all figured out, but with a focus on what I can be good at, as opposed to trying to be everything to everyone, and it has a lot more value, I think.
I think a pretty interesting aspect over here, Dean, and I remember one of the quotations by a writer called as Ernest Hemingway. He once said that there is nothing noble to being a superior to your fellow man, but true nobility is to be superior from your former self. So, it's all about getting better than who you were yesterday. And I think that's what is happening with us is when we see the world around us. And I believe you made a pretty valid point on internet, and I would take it to the next level, which is social media, which has actually put us to a very relative platform of followers, likes, and that, the whole influencer aspect of that tangibility, where, the good or bad, rather success and no success, is in that objective number of either number of followers, number of likes, number of engagements, or maybe whatever that is. And I think that is giving people a lot of pressure and the intent to compare. You know what I'm saying?
And, and again, this goes to maybe part of, the background is I don't have the PhD analysis behind what, and I never will, right? I don't have a to go to that, but whether it's endorphins, whether it's the chemical reaction to receiving notification on a device that somebody clicked like, that that fleeting moment that we see our kids get excited about, but then they're drained when it doesn't happen, and they live on that positive feedback. To your point, it's a different dynamic. And I have 3 daughters. My oldest is, might as well be 25. She's that close to it. All right. And actually, she is 25. Sorry, my math is bad. Almost 26. Another one just turned 22. And I've got another one that just turned 17. And I watch them each individually in their own way look for it as a way to somehow validate that yesterday was better than today because they got a like more. And it's been a challenge, right? As a parent, you really have to figure out some of that. And it's hypocritical. We are by no means saying that we have it figured out, right? I by no means am better than I am yesterday every day. There are bad days. And, it's just a matter of, can you get past that, right? And the social media thing is really, really scary that way, I think, because then you can start seeing how people will test each other. So let's say I put a post out there on LinkedIn and you and I just had this conversation. Do I wait all day just to see if you click on it? Right. And it actually challenges our friendship, because if you don't click it, then what did I do wrong? And how come you don't like me?
Exactly.
And why? Right. And it may be just a simple fact that you scrolled by too fast. That might be just all it is. So, I don't know. And getting back to parental, environmental, or whatever, I mean, I'd like to think we're almost all brought up to be challenged to strive for something more, whether it's our parents or whoever. And, it's kind of what it is, right? How do you put all that together and still build a level of resiliency to get through it? It's not easy, right? I mean, I've been in my wheelchair 8.5 years. It took me probably about 5 years to figure out that everything was really going to be okay. Right. And, to develop an idea around this thing called average and just settling in on it and being comfortable with that. It took some time. Right. And I'm like I said, I'm 47 now. I mean, try being 19 and trying to get your head around how some of that works. I don't know.
I think, and I completely agree with you, Dean. I don't think so we'll have answers to all of this ever, because, as we start understanding the questions, the personal average of the question may change as well. The reality for that time may change, because the average of reality is changing every year for that matter, right? I was in fact listening to one of the podcasts by a fellow photographer. His name is David Duchemin, and I love his podcast because he doesn't talk about just photography in general. He talks about the issue with creativity, right? And one word he said is becoming a word of the year and can become the word of maybe century, which is called as overwhelmingness. Of course, 2020 is very overwhelming for all of us because of, very sad reasons of COVID and other stuff. But I think we all are overwhelmed because of the seeking of that instant gratification, one through social media, second through these likes and followers. And then again, that comparative analysis happening. And I'll give you an example. Today this happened with me. I was talking to a good friend of mine about that. We have a session today, and he said, "Hey, go for it." And you never know, you'll start having 1 million followers. And I'm like in a pressure. Damn. Why do I even need to look at 1 million followers? Because that is giving me more anxiousness, and that gives me a distraction from what I need to do to where I want to be. So I completely agree. And I think we all are in that pressure to prove ourselves. And I think success has gone, the meaning has gone a bit distorted for all of us because of this whole thing. And I think personally with you, Dean, I've after seeing your talk and the way you said that, it took you 5.5 years to actually come up the whole curve and, of course, accept that reality. It wouldn't have been very easy for you, isn't it?
Um, there's definitely stages, right? And speaking about success, I'm going to remind me to get back to the idea of the TED Talk and speak to that, right? There's certainly a thing there, right? There's definitely stages. The first 4 weeks in the hospital here locally, being the only one in a wheelchair, the only one with a spinal injury, to then the next 6 weeks of being in Denver, Colorado at a specialty spinal cord rehabilitation hospital, where now I have people around me that are in a similar situation, right? To then coming home and being dropped off and now what?
Yeah.
I'm not around caregivers anymore. I'm not around the nurses and the staff to help me get rehabbed. At that point in time, relying on community was a really, really big thing for me. We live in a relative community in a rural setting. And they were not about to let me fail. And they were very much around, and you can't say thank you to each of them individually, just as a group. And hopefully people understand what that means. But the thing that I think really started to trip it is I kind of searched for those middle years for something to compete with, not compete against somebody, but just what is that challenge for me that I can aim for? And if you want to call it goal setting or whatever, I think it's a little different than that. Having a goal, in my opinion, is a little different, where you're sitting down and you methodically have a notion where you're going to write it on and put some plans. For me, it was more a matter of somebody said, hey, I wonder if you can do this. I wonder if you can do that. And it was presented to me as a challenge, whether it was, to enter a half marathon, to do a full marathon in a wheelchair, right? It was presented as a challenge, not as a, hey, I'm going to set a goal that in 2 years, I'm going to do the Boston Marathon. It kind of just happened. And because of that, I was able to make it less of this lofty, planned out thing. And I could chip away every day at that. And it became very much a part of every day for me. So we're going to go do a marathon. Great. Let's get working. I didn't say that I wanted to break a certain time in the marathon. I didn't say I wanted to make sure I achieve whatever, but the challenge was there. And as a person growing up, I've always appreciated, and maybe a little chip on my shoulder, people saying, hey, I don't know if you can do that. How about you show me? And it had nothing to do with being better or stronger than anybody else. But in regards to the TED Talk, so I'd always wanted to go to TED, as an you see these videos and you're like, wow, I could learn so much, and it'd be so great to immerse yourself in that crowd. Never in a million years that I think I'd be on stage. And I was presented an opportunity and it worked out. But one of the things that you have to realize is that if you're, at least in our case, right, the case of the group that I was presenting with, you don't go into that situation trying to create a viral talk. You go into that situation giving your talk, and it becomes viral based on factors that are not in your control. And so the number of clicks, thank you for ratcheting up my number, by the way. The number of clicks that you have, you can't go into that talk determining success or failure on the number of clicks. The community, the world will decide that. The success is the fact that you got on a stage and you did it. And you need to be comfortable with that. I don't know if I've watched a TED Talk that wasn't valuable. But not all of them have the same number of views. And that's okay. I think that's the point, right? Because each one of them has a different conversation. So as luck would have it, and it's not lucky, but my talk came out when COVID was happening. And that in itself has an impact that I have nothing to do with, right? And so the success of that talk, or lack thereof, or whatever you want to call it, is really based on factors outside of my control. I can only do as good as I can do. I can only get on the stage and present what I can present. And if people find it valuable to them, then I'm so happy. That's great. But if you didn't, it doesn't really bother me, because it's maybe just doesn't resonate for you. As today, we're at 1.8 million views on this talk that, I just got up and told my story. And I'm humbled, flattered. Do I want to see it hit 2 million? Absolutely. I want to see it hit 2 million, but that doesn't mean that I'm not thrilled if it doesn't, right? I mean, just one of those things. Anyways.
Right. I think, I think I get your point. What I understand, and I can completely relate to this, is that if we start whatever we would want to start with of course, keeping greatness in mind, but if you want to kind of see a lot of glamour, if we need to reach that glamour stage, then I think we'll be distracted to what we really want to do.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the effort will get diluted, because I don't think so anybody would start, let's say, the top 5 TED Talks. I don't think so any speaker would have thought that, hey, they will land into the top 5.
Right.
But if they would have actually started that way, I think I can bet that they wouldn't have landed in the top 5 because they are distracted from the goal.
Right. So as an example, the first marathon I did was in Chicago. I had no idea what goal I should have for a time, and I think it would have been unfair to myself to set that goal. I would have missed out on the experience of the event, right? So the Chicago Marathon, 20, 30,000 people running in that marathon, 50 or so wheelchairs. And had I been so focused on, I got to get this time, I think I would have lost track of the event. I think I would have lost track of how exciting it was to be there. Here I am at the start line and then going through the communities, all the crowds cheering. And when I finished, I'm like, all right, cool. I finished. That's the first thing, right? I was really happy with my time, but my preparation already told me what my time was going to be. I didn't need to set a goal, right? And then even today, as I do my training and I prepare for whatever that next race is, I would certainly love to hit a 1 hour and 45 minute marathon mark. My best is 1:53. It would be great to find a way to get 8 minutes, cut off, divide that by 26 miles, and to think about, how many seconds per mile do I need to be faster?
Wow.
And it becomes very obsessive, right? And I can be obsessive here as I'm prepping day after day. Am I better than yesterday? Did I perform as well? And keep in mind, that doesn't necessarily mean did my time get better, but did my effort get better? Did I, right? There's a lot of different ways to measure that. But come race day, I mean, so we're going to line up for the Boston Marathon. If you get so focused on that, in my case, you're going to miss out on the event. In my case, I'm not world class. I am not a Paralympian. I am not going to go for a gold medal. I'm not going to win the Boston Marathon, right? And so while I'm aware of my friends that are of that caliber, it doesn't diminish the enjoyment I have from it, right? And it's, I don't know, I'm just thrilled. It's that challenge that's out there and becomes very much on myself every day to find a way to continue to get better that way.
I so agree. And I think I'm resonating this fact or this thought to one of the quotes by Denzel Washington in one of his movies, Equalizer. It's progress, not perfection.
Yep.
Right. So one step at a time, keep progressing. Don't look at perfection, because if you look at perfection, you will be scared and you will never attempt ever.
Right. And you will feel when you do try and you don't make it, you'll give up. And
exactly.
And that's the same point, right? Is that I know what my buddies are capable of. I know what my friends can do and how fast they can go. I'm just happy they talk to me, right? And we have a good time. And they allow me to ask them questions that will help me get a little bit better. And I'm not a threat to them by any means, right? In terms of performance, but I had to be very careful. And it was hard initially when you first show up to an event and the people that you've been researching on the internet are there in front of you. It'd be like walking in and there's Denzel Washington. You're like, oh boy. I mean, he's the guy. He's here. What do you do? And you don't feel worthy. And the imposter syndrome kicks in and you start questioning. And it's very easy to fall back on that. And I think that, with my wheelchair stuff and the racing and the marathons, I'm over that now, but I can bet you that if I start to take on a new challenge, a totally different challenge, that I would still have a little bit of that imposter coming in until I got used to that scenario, right? So as an example, if I'm going to write a book, I'm going to start a podcast, I'm going to start acting. Who knows, right? Anything that's new, I'm going to fall into that. Am I good enough? Do I belong? Should I be there? And you have to find a way to fight through that. And then when you settle in, you realize, like, this is your podcast, right? The anxiety of you're going to have 1 million followers. When
absolutely.
When you get to episode 10, you can be like, all right, let's go. Here's another one, right? And you'll have this comfort, and no longer is that imposter thing there, because you're doing it, and you're doing
absolutely.
it for that you wanted to, not because you're trying to be somebody else.
Interesting, very interesting aspect. And I think I was making one point, I think it slipped my head. The imposter syndrome actually is I think it's a double-edged sword, Dean. Somebody was saying this to me, self-doubt is of course bad, but it's sometimes good as well, because sometimes you don't have that fear of failing, a self-doubt. Am I good enough or not? You can't give your best, because otherwise, if you don't have self-doubt at all, then I think you are pushing yourself to getting into that, arrogant overconfidence, and then you start making mistakes. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there's a point to having some swagger or some confidence, and that borderline arrogance thing. The average thing comes to mind when you say that. And average for me is my foundation. It's what I can build from, right? And I'm allowed to have self-doubt at that level, right? I'm allowed to wonder if I'm good enough to raise my level a little bit. That does not mean that I'm going to try and say, I can do whatever you ask me to, or tell you, and I can tell you how good I am. Like, no, my average is my average. You can feel what you that. You can, in your mind, think that I'm not good enough or think that it's incredible, but that's for you to figure out. I'm comfortable with where I'm at. And there are times where I'm going to doubt what I'm doing, based on where I know that foundation is. And to your point, to me, that just exposes something that I should maybe start to focus on. So back to the wheelchair racing, you're going to have to go up some hills now and then. And when you're using your arm, or if you're running a marathon, you're going to find out really quick a lot about yourself when you start getting tired. And that's where that self-doubt comes in. Am I going to get up this hill or not? And if you take that, at the end of the workout and you realize, I probably need to go home and work on hills. And then your next workout, you go find hills and you try to get better at hills. So then next time around, it's not an issue. That's all part of it. Right. And I think, to the arrogance thing, I think if somebody's telling you they have it all figured out, they're fooling themselves. Yes, people can be really, really good, right? And you can pick out Tiger Woods and Michael Jordan, and it's easier to talk athletics, right? You can pick out Bill Gates, right? They're all top notch because they are unceasing in their wanting more to challenge themselves, right? Tiger at the top of his game, the hours, he doesn't just show up and play. There's work that we don't see.
Absolutely.
Right? Bill Gates is reading how many books a week, right, to try to better himself still. Not because somebody's telling him to. There's a gap, and he wants to know more. So I really think it comes down to that. And I by no means have figured out my wheelchair. I know how to navigate in the environment I'm in. But I'll guarantee you there's a situation I have not met yet that I don't know how to get around it, but I'll find a way, just what it is.
Excellent. I think I'm loving the conversation, Dean, and I think this is actually pushing us to a next segment of something, which again I like and I picked up from your talk is about bad days?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm hoping that, people resonate with the conversation, because most of us are regular people. I have kids. I have a college degree, but I'm middle class. I help out with our school. I don't have all the statistics in the world. I'm just, every day there's something there. The good day, bad day thing took a lot of help from others to get through, especially in the days of that wheelchair, right? When I'm at the hospital and such, one of the ways that really helped you get through that is a lack of idleness. We had no time to stop and think, right? So a day at the hospital, the 6 weeks in Denver, was they came in and took your vitals at 6 a.m., 6:30 a.m. They heart rate, blood pressure, normal stuff, right? Checking you're okay. 7 o'clock, you're at breakfast. 8 o'clock, you're in the weight room. 9 o'clock, you are at a physical therapy session. 10 o'clock, you're in a classroom learning for stuff. At 11 o'clock, you get lunch. At 12, you're doing occupational therapy. And it just goes on and on. You end your day like at 4 o'clock with a wheelchair class where you're learning how to do wheelies and jump over curbs and just different things to maneuver in the world. And finally, after dinner, you get time to relax for a couple of hours. And then they wake you up every 2 hours every night to make sure you're okay. So there was so little time to worry about if something happened that didn't go well. And you had to move on to what's next. And it's a big part of the talk too, right? Is how do you compress that, right? I mean, the bad day happens, right? I can wake up, and before I even get to work or have my coffee, I can tell you if the day is going to be a struggle or not. You can just feel it sometimes, right? Or you can, a lot of it just might just be your attitude about it. But when you get going and you realize, I try not to fight it. If I know that the day is going to be difficult, I just embrace it and say, all right, let's get through it, as opposed to trying to fight against kind of like going against the stream. I mean, okay, today will be a day that's maybe a little bit down, but tomorrow will be different. But in that event of the wheelchair and the good and the bad and so on, most of the time the things that went wrong for me were very, very short-lived, and I found a way to extend them to make them bigger than they were. And I'm not saying there aren't bad things that happen that are, I mean, I get it, right? But, in the professional world, I speak to the talk, right? We've all had that uncomfortable meeting with our boss that was not the message we wanted to receive. And we've all had that meeting at 10 in the morning and lost an entire day, and then brought it home and spoke to our spouse and was frustrated at home. And we've let it bother us forever. And it's not that I don't have feelings that way, but I've really tried to compartmentalize it and shrink it down and get moving. That 1 hour of discussion does not have to take over my entire existence for that day. It's just what it is.
Pretty interesting aspect. And I think the beauty, Dean, is I think everybody knows it. And I think we all know it, right? We need to kind of put things in boxes and let those boxes not touch each other. But I think they're human beings, right? So sometimes, we kind of flow into these emotions and try to kind of see why that happened to me, why that conversation went so wrong. And I think to that point, that's my observation. We tend to overlive our bad days and underlive our good days because, that's how we are.
Yeah. And we're conditioned that way as we grow up, right? If you get in trouble as a child, you are grounded for a week, right? But if you get a report card and it's straight A's and you get told, all right, good job, and I'll get back to work. And
exactly.
We try to avoid the negative. And I'm not saying it should be worse or different that way, but it's interesting how we have a focus that way. And And I'm not saying that's bad, not at all.
Correct.
But there is something to that, I think. So
Yeah, I think you're right, and I personally feel is that it has to actually connect to a bit of a self-awareness of our own self. That if there are bad days, there are good days, and if there are good days, there are bad days. Let's just, like the way you said, accept them, embrace them, and move on.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not easy sometimes. And you might have 2 or 3 things in a day that starts rolling downhill. And again, it's okay. I mean, keep in mind, an average is a long-term calculation, right? It's every day.
Absolutely.
And the fortunate part with average as well is you don't get to take a day off. Every day counts, right? Every day counts. And so it's kind of like, back to the mathematics, right? So it would be if you're going to calculate an average, you throw out the null values before you divide to get the true average, right? There are no null days. You're not allowed to have a day that doesn't count. Everything counts. And so what are you going to do with that? You can't just take a day off. There are people counting on you. Your children are counting on you for a meal. That's why you're
Absolutely.
at work. Your teammate is counting on you. You can't just disappear. Even you say, I'm going to take a vacation. It doesn't matter, right? You're still there. You still have a day, right? This is what it is. You can't just disappear. So that's something that we try to work with on our teams, that we help coach and that we work with at work. And, that's why having a team is so powerful too, right? I mean, I can rely on my mate to have my back. I know that while we're doing this podcast, that my team at work has things handled. And I'm not a manager, right? I don't have people that report to me. I'm an individual contributor, right? But I know my teammates have it covered, and I know when they need help, I'll have them covered. And so that whole concept of good day, bad day has an impact there too. That you're not alone, but you can't just disappear either. Every day counts.
Absolutely. Because I think that's a good point. You said that, the collaboration makes it more easier to actually sail through. Now, whether it is a collaboration in families, whether it is your spouse, whether it is your kids, whether it is your parents, or at work, that intent of sailing through makes all the difference. Because if you have that intent, and I think that's the only thing which matters.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think one of the things that maybe, I don't know, I didn't have a chance to really bring it out in the talk, and you have so little time, right? But the team dynamic is interesting to me in that, what if everybody jumped in and thought about it like we're talking? What if everybody just focused on themselves and bumped the average a little bit? You think about what the entire team will do collectively. So if you and I are on the same team and I was worried about trying to be as good as you, and I, in the end, don't really do anything to help myself, the team between us doesn't exceed as much. But if together we both take that approach, I mean, the performance needle on your team can be ridiculous. And it's not just work and employment, right? I mean, it's life. It's your family unit. It's social work, all those things. But it takes time. And I think it takes a team that is very much open with each other. I was going to use the word candor.
Yeah.
But the fact that you're on a team, there's a relationship there. And if I'm going to give you feedback saying, hey, come on, you can do better than that. That's not me beating you up. It's me saying, hey, get back to what you're good at. Right. And let's get to it again. And I think having that openness in those relationships and those units, I think really helps drive everything forward. But it's harder, right? I mean, people are competitive and they want to be like somebody else. They want to do as well as somebody else. And so you have to keep bringing that around and keep reminding folks that way.
Yeah, I think I agree, because again, and this has been a problem. I don't want to call that still to be a problem, but this has been an issue always, right? Competitiveness. And, I go back to that Ernest Hemingway's post. We all are competitive to the person next.
Right.
we are never competitive to ourselves, right? So I think that's where that whole the issue with ideology. If I need to beat the person next, I can do that, and I may do that, and I'm happy with that. But maybe I'm losing the larger battle of could be a potential of maybe becoming a little more better than who I was,
Yeah.
And if I compare both the things together, I could have been a much better individual if I have beaten up my last record.
Right. Right.
But again, we are in that trap.
Yeah. And again, it's not easy to get through. For whatever reason, I found it to be easier, like we were saying before, without the rigidity of a solid goal that I'm chasing. I found it easier to manage the day to day. That's not to say I'm not goal oriented or I don't believe in goals. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is, I know when my next race is, or at least I did before COVID. I know my next race is. I know how many weeks away that is. I know my schedule leading towards that. But in those situations, I also know that if I miss a day because I don't feel well, I'm still going to go to that race. So it's a little different than goal setting, right? And I think with that in mind, I have an opportunity to say it's okay to have a bad day. Now, if I were to set a goal that I wanted to be promoted to a senior level manager, in the next 3 years, that's a different conversation, right? And there's a different day-to-day activity you need to take. And it's not that it's a diminished experience or more difficult or harder or a different approach. But I think it has context that way. So what would a day in the life look like for me if that was my goal 3 years from now? And if that's the case, what am I doing to make sure I am increasing my average as I go through it? I think I'm looking at a very simplistic thing is my point. Getting to a race is very simple. Getting faster is a very simple thing. Getting promoted in 3 years, there are so many different nuances and avenues there. And so if I have some things figured out, could I apply those things to that type of a goal? Absolutely. Right. But it takes a little bit more planning or organization, I think, to chase some of those big rocks that way.
I so agree, Dean. Dean, this has been a lovely conversation.
Absolutely. Having fun.
And I think we have quite interestingly unearthed some of the basic nuances of our daily life, and I want to thank you for taking a time out on a day, and working around on your schedule to have this conversation. Right now it's 10:30 in India for me, but I think I still have my night in control than your day, of course, because you're still working, isn't it?
Sure. Yes, there's some things going there, and I think maybe just to kind of put one more thought out there for everybody. I've had an opportunity to be on some other podcasts and other talks, and there's this conversation that comes out now and then about the COVID thing. So let's just address that really quick, right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to, for myself, selfishly, I'm trying to make sure that I don't look back at the last few months and realize that I didn't accomplish anything. And my excuse being COVID. And here in the US, whether you are in lockdown or anywhere in the world and you're not allowed to do whatever, that doesn't mean you can't do anything. And so in my case, I'm starting to put together some of the things that I've written to see if I have something that might be published that might be interesting, right? My point is, for those that are listening and that will listen, you don't need permission to go do stuff right now, right? You might need a mask, and I get that, but you can focus on your diet and your health. You can focus on that project at your home that you've been waiting to start. And I think the point is that it'll be unfortunate if we look back at the last 5-6 months and realize that we've got nothing done because we're waiting for something that we really don't need to wait for. And I understand. I'm not saying avoid COVID and ignore it. I'm not saying break the rules. I'm just saying there surely are some things that you can start on and continue working on instead of waiting for someone to say, hey, we're ready to go. So I just hope people can take advantage of that. And it's hypocritical for me. I'm certainly still trying to figure that out. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens when we finally get a vaccine and we finally get some of these things to work. But yeah, it's been a great talk. Thanks for having me.
No, absolutely. And I think I'm completely with you, Dean. If you have an intent, you can do it. If you don't have an intent, COVID will be one more justification for not doing it, of course.
Right. Exactly.
Right. Great.
Yep.
Dean, appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Really thankful for taking your time, and let's stay connected.
Absolutely. Looking forward.
It.
Yeah. Have a great weekend. We'll talk soon.
Same here. Take care, Dean.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.